Most people believe stepping away is a sign of weakness. The real danger is never stepping away at all. It is remaining constantly available to people, expectations, and distractions that quietly consume your peace. It doesn't happen through one life-changing mistake. It happens one conversation at a time, one obligation after another, one compromise after the next, until the silence you once feared becomes something you no longer remember. The hardest prison to escape is not built with walls. It is built with habits that slowly convince you your worth depends on always being present, always responding, and always carrying burdens that were never yours to begin with. The Stoics understood a truth that feels almost forgotten today. A restless mind cannot hear its own wisdom. Every moment spent chasing approval, reacting to opinions, or satisfying endless demands pulls you a little farther away from yourself. Eventually, the loudest voice in your life is no longer your own judgment, but the expectations of everyone around you. No circumstance can take away that inner refuge. Only distraction can. Yet when every quiet moment belongs to someone else's priorities instead of your own reflection, even that refuge begins to feel out of reach. That is why stepping back is not an act of escape. It is an act of returning. Returning to the part of yourself that existed before constant availability became a measure of your value, before the world's noise became louder than your own reason. The Stoics believed that no one can live with courage, discipline, or tranquility while being ruled by every demand placed upon them. Sometimes the strongest decision is not to do more. It is to become still long enough to remember who you are when the noise finally fades. There comes a point when constant presence begins costing more than it gives back. It rarely announces itself with a dramatic event or an obvious turning point. Instead, it settles into life so quietly that it almost feels natural. One day becomes another, and before long, being constantly available feels less like a choice and more like an expectation. Every message receives an immediate reply. Every request earns a quick yes. Every conversation asks for another piece of your attention. None of these moments seem significant on their own, yet together they begin shaping the direction of your life. Little by little, your time no longer belongs to you. Your thoughts become occupied by what everyone else needs, expects, or wants from you, while your own inner voice grows quieter with each passing day. What once felt like kindness slowly becomes obligation, and obligation has a way of exhausting even the strongest mind. The Stoics recognized this danger long before the modern world surrounded us with endless notifications and constant demands for attention. They understood that the greatest threat to tranquility was not always found in extraordinary hardship, but in ordinary distractions repeated without awareness. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the mind has the power to withdraw into itself, finding peace that no external circumstance can provide. Yet that peace becomes difficult to reach when every spare moment is filled with reacting to something outside your control. Instead of beginning the day with intention, many people begin it by surrendering their attention. Before their own thoughts have a chance to settle, someone else's priorities have already entered their mind. Hours pass responding, adjusting, and accommodating until the day ends exactly as it began, driven more by reaction than by deliberate choice. This pattern is so common that it rarely feels unhealthy. Society often rewards the person who is always reachable, always dependable, and always willing to sacrifice their own time. Such behavior is praised as generosity, responsibility, or dedication. While those qualities certainly have value, they lose their virtue when they exist without balance. A person who never protects their own peace eventually finds themselves unable to offer genuine presence to anyone else. They continue showing up physically while their mind quietly drifts toward fatigue. They smile through conversations that leave them drained. They accept commitments they no longer have the energy to fulfill. Outwardly, everything appears stable, yet inwardly a slow erosion has already begun. It is difficult to notice because nothing seems broken all at once. The loss arrives gradually, almost politely, asking for just one more piece of yourself each day. This is why the Stoics placed such importance on examining the mind before trying to change the world around them. They believed that discipline begins not with controlling circumstances, but with observing how easily attention can be captured by them. The moment you stop examining your own reactions, you begin living according to habits rather than principles. Someone else's mood influences yours. Someone else's urgency becomes your emergency. Approval starts feeling necessary instead of optional. Eventually, decisions are no longer measured against wisdom or virtue, but against the possibility of disappointing someone else. Without realizing it, the standard for your life shifts away from your own judgment. The world begins deciding how you spend your energy, and you quietly accept its decisions as though they were your own. The strange part is that this way of living often feels productive. A full schedule creates the illusion of purpose. Endless conversations create the illusion of connection. Constant activity creates the illusion of progress. Yet movement and direction are not the same thing. A person can spend years moving from one responsibility to another without ever asking whether those responsibilities reflect the life they truly wish to build. Carl Jung observed that the human mind cannot hear itself clearly when it is surrounded by endless noise. A life filled with constant activity leaves very little room for honest reflection, making it easy to mistake motion for meaning. Stoicism encourages a different kind of question. Instead of asking whether something can be done, it asks whether it should be done. That small distinction changes everything because it places intention ahead of impulse. It reminds us that discipline is not measured by how much we accomplish, but by how wisely we choose where our attention belongs. Attention is one of the few resources that can never be recovered once it has been spent. Money can be earned again. Possessions can be replaced. Lost opportunities sometimes return in unexpected ways. Time and attention follow different rules. Every moment devoted to unnecessary conflict, endless comparison, or obligations accepted out of guilt is a moment that can never be reclaimed. The Stoics understood this deeply. They viewed attention as an expression of character because whatever consistently occupies the mind eventually shapes it. A distracted mind becomes restless. A reactive mind becomes anxious. A disciplined mind, however, learns to remain steady even when the world insists on pulling it in every direction at once. Recognizing this shift is rarely comfortable because it forces an honest look at the habits that quietly govern everyday life. Many people assume they are making conscious choices when, in reality, they are simply responding to patterns repeated so often they no longer question them. The need to answer immediately, the inability to sit in silence, the feeling that every request deserves a response. These habits appear harmless until they begin replacing reflection with automatic reaction. Once that happens, exhaustion no longer feels unusual, it feels normal. And perhaps that is the greatest warning of all. When a restless mind begins believing that constant depletion is simply the price of living, it stops searching for another way. The Stoics would argue that this is precisely the moment awareness becomes necessary, because the first step toward reclaiming your life is recognizing that your mind was never meant to belong to everyone except you. That realization naturally leads to a more uncomfortable question, because it asks us to look somewhere we rarely choose to look. There is a difference between being physically alone and truly allowing the mind to become still. Most people experience the first from time to time, yet very few experience the second. The moment silence appears, the instinct to fill it often appears just as quickly. A phone is unlocked without thinking. Music begins playing in the background. Another conversation starts. Another distraction arrives at exactly the right moment to keep deeper thoughts from reaching the surface. These habits seem harmless because they are so familiar, yet familiarity has a way of disguising dependence. When every quiet moment must immediately be replaced with stimulation, it becomes difficult to know whether we are enjoying the distractions or simply afraid of what remains when they disappear. The Stoics deliberately made space for silence because they understood something that modern life often encourages us to forget. The condition of the mind cannot be measured accurately while it is constantly reacting to the world around it. A lake disturbed by endless waves cannot reflect the sky clearly. In the same way, a mind pulled from one interruption to the next struggles to perceive itself honestly. At first, that quiet rarely feels comforting. It often feels unfamiliar. Thoughts that have been patiently waiting beneath the surface begin asking for attention. Small frustrations that seemed insignificant during a busy day suddenly appear much larger. Old disappointments return without invitation. Unresolved emotions, once buried beneath endless activity, slowly make themselves known. Many people interpret this experience as proof that solitude is unhealthy because it feels uncomfortable. Yet discomfort is not always a warning that something is wrong. Sometimes it is evidence that something honest is finally being seen. The Stoics believed that growth often begins where comfort ends, because truth is rarely discovered while the mind remains entertained by constant distraction. If these reflections have helped you see yourself a little more clearly, consider subscribing. This isn't about collecting more ideas. It's about practicing the kind of wisdom that quietly changes the way you live, one reflection at a time. This is why solitude demands courage rather than isolation. There is no audience to impress, no expectations to satisfy, and no conversation capable of redirecting attention away from yourself. The mind begins revealing habits that previously operated unnoticed. You may discover how often your mood depends on external approval, or how quickly your thoughts become unsettled when certainty disappears. These observations are not reasons for shame, they are opportunities for understanding. A physician cannot heal an illness that remains hidden, and the mind cannot strengthen qualities it refuses to acknowledge. Self-examination has always been one of the foundations of Stoic practice, because lasting discipline grows from awareness rather than denial. As the silence continues, another change quietly unfolds. The urgency that once surrounded every notification, every opinion, and every expectation begins losing some of its emotional power. Problems that once demanded immediate attention become easier to examine with patience instead of impulse. This does not happen because circumstances suddenly improve. It happens because distance creates perspective. The mind gradually realizes that not every thought deserves belief, not every emotion requires immediate action, and not every outside demand deserves equal importance. This realization is subtle, yet it changes the way a person experiences daily life. Instead of being pulled in every direction by whatever appears next, there is a growing ability to pause before responding. That pause may seem insignificant, but it is where freedom quietly begins. Many people mistake this process for becoming emotionally distant, when the opposite is often true. A calmer mind becomes more capable of genuine presence because it is no longer consumed by constant internal noise. Patience becomes easier when attention is no longer scattered. Listening becomes deeper because the need to prepare the next response begins fading. Even ordinary moments take on a different quality. A walk no longer feels like wasted time. A quiet morning no longer demands immediate stimulation. Reflection stops feeling unproductive and starts becoming one of the most valuable forms of preparation. The Stoics never viewed stillness as inactivity. They understood it as training for wiser action when action was finally required. Eventually, the discomfort that first accompanied silence begins changing into something steadier. Not excitement, not constant happiness, something far more reliable: clarity. The thoughts that once rushed through the mind without examination now arrive more slowly, making room for deliberate judgment. Emotional reactions lose some of their urgency because they are no longer accepted without question. This does not mean difficult feelings disappear. They simply stop becoming unquestioned commands. The Stoic learns that emotions deserve acknowledgement, but decisions deserve reason. That distinction protects the mind from being carried away by every passing impulse. It is only after spending enough time in genuine silence that another realization begins to take shape. At first it feels subtle, almost too small to notice, yet once it appears it becomes difficult to ignore. Much of what we confidently call our personality may not be as original as we once believed. Many of our reactions, preferences, habits, and even ambitions have been quietly influenced by the people we spend the most time around. This does not mean our identity is false, but it does suggest that it is far more impressionable than we like to admit. Carl Jung believed that the personality we build to survive the expectations of the world can eventually become so loud that our authentic self is buried beneath it. Without realizing it, we begin protecting an identity shaped by acceptance rather than by truth. The Stoics understood that the human mind naturally absorbs its surroundings. For that reason, they encouraged careful attention to character, not because the world was evil, but because the world is persuasive. Praise is one of the most persuasive forces a person can encounter. It feels harmless because it arrives wrapped in approval, encouragement, and acceptance. There is nothing wrong with appreciating kind words, yet the Stoics warned that the moment praise becomes necessary, freedom quietly begins slipping away. A person who depends on approval gradually hands their peace to the opinions of others. Every compliment becomes a source of confidence, but every criticism becomes a threat to identity. Life slowly transforms into a performance measured by applause instead of principle. Without noticing the shift, choices begin serving reputation before virtue. The danger is not that other people influence us. The danger is forgetting that they are influencing us at all. This change rarely happens through dramatic moments. It develops through ordinary interactions repeated hundreds of times. Someone receives approval for always saying yes, so saying yes becomes automatic. Another earns admiration for appearing agreeable, so disagreement begins feeling dangerous. A third discovers that being constantly available makes them feel valued, so every boundary starts looking selfish. These patterns settle into everyday life until they no longer feel like decisions. They feel like personality. Yet habits formed to gain acceptance are not always expressions of character. Sometimes they are simply strategies that once helped us belong. The Stoics believed wisdom begins when we separate inherited habits from deliberate values, because only then can our actions truly become our own. This is where honest reflection becomes uncomfortable. It asks questions that cannot be answered quickly. Which parts of your life are guided by conviction and which are guided by expectation? Which decisions would remain exactly the same if nobody praised them? Those reflections are not invitations to reject society or withdraw from meaningful relationships. They are invitations to examine motivation. Stoicism has never taught indifference toward other people. It teaches independence from the need to be constantly affirmed by them. There is a profound difference between acting with kindness because it reflects your values and acting with kindness because you fear losing acceptance. Outwardly, the behavior may appear identical, yet inwardly the experience is completely different. Once this distinction becomes visible, everyday situations begin revealing themselves in new ways. You notice how quickly the mind seeks reassurance after making an unpopular decision. You notice the subtle urge to explain yourself longer than necessary, hoping others will understand your intentions. You notice the quiet disappointment that follows when efforts go unnoticed. None of these reactions make someone weak. They simply reveal how deeply the desire for approval has become woven into ordinary life. The Stoics never expected perfection. They expected awareness. They understood that lasting change begins the moment hidden motives become visible, because what is clearly seen can finally be guided instead of unconsciously obeyed. There is also a quieter consequence of living for approval that often escapes attention. The more energy devoted to satisfying expectations, the less energy remains for developing sound judgment. Decisions become faster but not wiser. Priorities become crowded by obligations that were accepted without reflection. Gradually, the inner voice grows uncertain because it has not been trusted for so long. Instead of asking what reason suggests, the mind immediately wonders what others might think. That habit creates a subtle dependence that reaches far beyond social situations. It begins shaping confidence itself. A person who constantly looks outward for confirmation slowly loses the ability to stand firmly upon inward conviction. The Stoics believed that character should be built like a strong foundation beneath a house. Storms may arrive, opinions may change, praise may appear one day and disappear the next, but the structure remains steady because it rests upon something deeper than public approval. Virtue cannot depend upon popularity because popularity shifts with circumstances. Integrity cannot depend upon recognition because recognition often arrives late, if it arrives at all. A disciplined mind accepts this reality without bitterness. It continues choosing what is right, even when nobody notices, because its purpose is no longer to impress the crowd, but to remain faithful to principles that do not change with fashion or emotion. As this understanding settles more deeply, an unexpected sense of relief begins to appear. There is less pressure to manage every impression and less urgency to prove your worth through endless effort. Conversations become more honest because they are no longer driven by the fear of disappointing everyone. Boundaries become clearer because they arise from self-respect rather than resentment. Even silence feels different. It is no longer an empty space waiting to be filled, but a place where judgment grows stronger. The approval that once seemed essential gradually loses its authority, replaced by something quieter and far more dependable. A peaceful mind no longer asks whether it is accepted before choosing wisely. It asks whether the choice itself is worthy, trusting that a life directed by reason will always be more fulfilling than one directed by applause. Stepping away for a time is often misunderstood. Many people see it as withdrawal, avoidance, or even indifference, but those assumptions usually come from a world that has become uncomfortable with stillness. Choosing distance does not mean turning your back on life. It means creating enough space to see it more clearly. The Stoics believed that a person cannot judge wisely while being carried along by every passing emotion or every demand placed before them. Judgment requires perspective, and perspective rarely appears when the mind is surrounded by constant activity. Sometimes the greatest act of discipline is resisting the urge to react immediately, allowing thoughts to settle before deciding what truly deserves your attention. Something remarkable happens when that space begins to grow. Situations that once felt overwhelming gradually lose their urgency. Problems that seemed impossible begin shrinking to their proper size. You realize that many of the pressures dominating your thoughts were never as permanent or as important as they first appeared. They only felt enormous because they were viewed from too close a distance. Just as a traveler sees the shape of a landscape only after climbing higher, the mind begins recognizing patterns that remained invisible while it was standing in the middle of them. The circumstances themselves may not have changed, yet your relationship with them certainly has. The Stoics encouraged observing people without rushing to condemn them. Every person acts according to their own beliefs, fears, and level of understanding. That includes those who become uncomfortable when your attention is no longer constantly available. Their reactions often reveal more about their expectations than about your decision. Recognizing this does not require harsh judgment. It requires calm observation. Instead of asking who is right or wrong, you begin noticing what each response teaches about human nature and about your own tendencies. In many cases, the greatest lesson is not found in someone else's behavior, but in the emotions their behavior awakens within you. This quiet period also reveals how often urgency has been confused with importance. Modern life encourages immediate responses, immediate opinions, and immediate solutions, creating the impression that every interruption deserves equal attention. The Stoics challenged this way of living by reminding themselves that reason should lead action rather than impulse. When you step back, even briefly, you begin separating what genuinely matters from what merely demands attention. Some concerns fade almost immediately once they are no longer fed by constant thought. Others remain, proving that they deserve careful consideration. That distinction becomes one of the most valuable forms of wisdom, because it protects your energy from being scattered across countless unnecessary concerns. As clarity grows, another subtle transformation begins. The need to explain yourself becomes less intense. Not because communication loses its value, but because your confidence no longer depends upon universal agreement. There is freedom in realizing that every decision does not require approval before it becomes worthwhile. The Stoics understood that a peaceful life is built upon living according to sound principles rather than shifting opinions. This does not make a person distant or uncaring. On the contrary, it often makes them more patient, more thoughtful, and more capable of offering genuine attention when it is truly needed. Eventually, you recognize that stepping away never created a different reality. It simply allowed you to see the existing one without so much interference. The noise had been disguising what was already there. The constant pace had been preventing careful observation. Once those distractions quieted, truth became easier to recognize, not because it suddenly appeared, but because it finally had room to be noticed. That is why periods of intentional distance are not acts of rejection. They are acts of understanding. They remind us that a disciplined mind does not become stronger by reacting to everything around it. It becomes stronger by learning, with quiet confidence, what is worthy of its attention and what can be peacefully allowed to pass. The Stoics paid careful attention to this habit because they understood that the mind does not merely observe reality, it interprets it. Epictetus reminded his students that people are disturbed not by events themselves, but by the judgments they form about those events. This idea appears simple until it is applied to ordinary life. The difference between peace and anxiety often exists within a single interpretation. The same criticism that one person receives as an opportunity to improve becomes, for someone else, a lasting wound to their identity. The same delay that one person accepts with patience becomes another person's source of endless worry. Circumstances remain remarkably similar, yet the inner experience changes completely because judgment quietly shapes emotion before emotion influences action. Modern life makes this habit even more difficult to recognize because information moves faster than reflection. Opinions appear instantly. Messages arrive constantly. News competes for attention every hour. Carl Jung observed that modern life keeps people psychologically occupied through constant messages, constant updates, and constant interaction, leaving very little room to sit quietly with themselves. He believed that this confrontation with the self is precisely what many people spend their lives avoiding. In such an environment, the mind becomes accustomed to reacting before understanding. It fills empty spaces with assumptions because waiting feels uncomfortable. Certainty, even false certainty, often feels easier than admitting that not every question has an immediate answer. This is why stepping back becomes so valuable. Distance slows the pace just enough to expose the hidden process taking place beneath every emotional reaction. You begin noticing how quickly the mind creates explanations without possessing complete evidence. Once that process becomes visible, it begins losing some of its power. Perhaps the most surprising discovery is how often fear speaks with the voice of certainty. It rarely announces itself as imagination. Instead, it presents its conclusions as undeniable facts. It insists that silence must mean rejection, that disagreement must lead to conflict, or that one mistake defines an entire future. The mind becomes remarkably persuasive when it is protecting itself from uncertainty. Yet protection built upon assumption often creates the very suffering it hopes to avoid. The Stoics encouraged questioning these automatic judgments, not because every thought is false, but because every thought deserves examination before it becomes belief. Wisdom begins with the willingness to separate observation from interpretation, allowing reason to enter where impulse once ruled alone. This pause changes far more than individual moments. It gradually transforms character. A person who learns to examine thoughts before accepting them becomes less controlled by temporary emotions. Frustration still appears, but it no longer dictates every response. Disappointment still exists, yet it loses the ability to define an entire day. There is space between the experience and the reaction, and within that space, something remarkable begins to grow. Choice. The Stoics believed this inner freedom was among the greatest forms of strength because external circumstances cannot always be controlled, while judgment remains a responsibility that belongs to each individual. The ability to pause, reflect, and respond deliberately is not weakness. It is discipline in its quietest form. This does not mean difficult emotions disappear once awareness develops. Sadness still visits. Doubt still appears without invitation. Moments of uncertainty continue to arrive because they are part of being human. Stoicism never promised a life without emotional struggle. It offered a different relationship with that struggle. Instead of becoming immediate commands, emotions become experiences that can be observed with patience. They are acknowledged without being allowed to govern every decision. Over time, this practice creates a steadier mind, not because life becomes easier, but because the person experiencing life becomes less vulnerable to every passing impulse. As this perspective deepens, everyday situations begin feeling different. Conversations become opportunities to understand rather than contests to win. Delays become moments to practice patience instead of invitations to worry. Even criticism starts revealing useful information once it is separated from wounded pride. Some remarks deserve careful attention because they contain truth. Others deserve peaceful release because they reflect someone else's perspective rather than objective reality. Learning to distinguish between the two is one of the most practical forms of wisdom the Stoics left behind. It protects energy, preserves clarity, and prevents countless unnecessary conflicts from taking root inside the mind. Eventually, you realize that the greatest change was never in the world around you. It occurred within the quiet habits of thought that shape every experience before you fully notice them. Circumstances continue to rise and fall. Praise still comes and goes, and uncertainty remains part of every meaningful life. Yet something essential has shifted. You no longer feel compelled to believe every conclusion the mind presents in moments of fear or frustration. Carl Jung warned that people who see only darkness in others often remain unconscious of their own shadow. True awareness begins when you recognize the same patterns within yourself: the need for validation, the desire to be admired, the quiet resentment that appears when you are overlooked. You observe first, you reflect before reacting, and within that simple practice lies a freedom that cannot be granted by success, approval, or favorable circumstances. It grows from disciplined judgment, strengthened one thoughtful pause at a time, until peace becomes less dependent on what happens around you and more deeply rooted in how you choose to understand it. That small pause begins changing more than your thoughts. It slowly changes the way you experience other people. For years, many of us unknowingly expect peace to arrive through circumstances we cannot control. We hope the next conversation will bring reassurance. We wait for someone to finally understand us completely. We believe that if enough people appreciate our intentions, then the restless feeling inside will finally disappear. Yet the Stoics repeatedly returned to a different conclusion. Lasting peace has never depended on perfect relationships or universal approval. It depends upon developing a character that remains steady regardless of how others choose to behave. This realization is both challenging and liberating because it shifts responsibility away from the unpredictable actions of other people and places it back into the only place where genuine influence has ever existed. This perspective does not excuse harmful behavior, nor does it suggest accepting disrespect without boundaries. Instead, it changes the emotional weight we attach to the actions of others. When someone speaks harshly, the immediate impulse is often to believe their words define our worth. When someone misunderstands our intentions, we instinctively want to explain ourselves until they finally agree. If they criticize us unfairly, we feel compelled to defend every detail of our character. Yet, most of these reactions arise from a quiet desire to control something that has never truly belonged to us. Other people's judgments exist within their own minds. They are shaped by experiences, assumptions, and emotions that we cannot rearrange through endless explanation. Recognizing this does not make communication unnecessary. It simply reminds us that understanding cannot be forced. Epictetus expressed this principle with remarkable simplicity when he taught that some things are within our control and others are not. The opinions of other people fall firmly into the second category. We can act honestly, we can speak thoughtfully, we can correct genuine mistakes when necessary. Beyond that, another person's interpretation belongs to them. Carl Jung observed that the same behavior may appear arrogant to one person, mysterious to another, and threatening to someone else. People rarely see us exactly as we are. They see us through the lens of their own experiences, fears, and expectations. Holding yourself responsible for every misunderstanding is like trying to calm the wind by speaking louder. The effort quickly becomes exhausting because the problem was never a lack of explanation. It was the mistaken belief that every mind can be guided according to our wishes. Once that illusion begins fading, a surprising amount of emotional energy quietly returns because you stop trying to control perceptions that were never yours to control in the first place. That energy no longer disappears into arguments that cannot be won or conversations that exist only to satisfy pride. Instead, it begins strengthening something far more valuable: character. The Stoics believed that the quality of a person's life is determined less by how they are perceived and more by who they become through repeated choices. Every moment once spent seeking validation can instead become an opportunity to practice patience. Every misunderstanding becomes an invitation to strengthen humility. Every criticism becomes a chance to examine whether there is wisdom hidden within it before calmly releasing what is untrue. This approach requires discipline because the ego naturally prefers immediate defense. Character, however, grows through thoughtful restraint rather than impulsive reaction. As this habit develops, resentment gradually begins losing its hold. Resentment often survives because the mind repeatedly returns to the belief that people should have behaved differently. They should have appreciated your effort. They should have understood your intentions. They should have recognized your value. Sometimes those expectations are reasonable, yet reality does not always cooperate with what feels fair. The Stoics understood that suffering increases whenever we demand that life unfold according to our preferences instead of accepting it as it actually unfolds. Acceptance is not surrender. It is the decision to stop fighting battles that exist only in imagination while focusing on the responsibilities that genuinely belong to us. This creates a quieter way of moving through relationships. You begin listening more carefully because proving yourself is no longer the highest priority. You become slower to judge because you remember how limited your own perspective can be. Small disagreements lose much of their emotional intensity because they are no longer treated as threats to identity. Even difficult people begin teaching valuable lessons, revealing where patience still needs strengthening or where clearer boundaries are required. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for practice rather than a test of personal worth. In this way, other people stop controlling the condition of your inner life without even realizing they ever had that influence. Over time, something subtle but profound changes. Approval still feels pleasant, but it is no longer essential. Criticism may still sting, yet it no longer defines the day. You stop measuring yourself by the constantly changing opinions surrounding you and begin measuring yourself by quieter standards that remain steady regardless of circumstance. Carl Jung believed that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. He also understood that this is rarely a gentle process because becoming yourself often requires letting go of the versions of you that existed only to keep other people comfortable. Did you act with integrity? Did you remain patient when impatience would have been easier? Did you choose wisdom over impulse, honesty over appearance, and self-command over emotional reaction? Those questions slowly replace the endless search for validation because they point towards something far more stable. The attention that once drifted endlessly toward the approval of others finally returns to where it has always belonged, becoming the foundation upon which lasting peace and genuine character are patiently built. One of the quieter changes that begins taking place is almost impossible to notice at first. The need to be constantly remembered slowly loses its urgency. The desire to stay present in every conversation, every group, and every moment of someone else's attention begins fading into the background. This does not happen because relationships become less meaningful. It happens because your understanding of them becomes more mature. You begin recognizing that genuine connection has never depended on constant contact. It depends on something far less visible and far more enduring. The Stoics believed that what is real does not require endless reinforcement to remain true. A friendship built upon mutual respect does not collapse because of silence. Character does not disappear because recognition fades. In the same way, a peaceful mind does not become unsettled simply because it is no longer at the center of everyone's attention. This realization changes expectations before it changes anything else. In the past, a delayed response might have created unnecessary concern. A quiet period between conversations might have felt like distance or rejection. Without realizing it, many people begin measuring the strength of a relationship by the frequency of interaction instead of the quality of it. Yet frequency is often a poor measure of closeness. Some conversations last for hours while leaving both people emotionally exhausted. Others are brief, sincere, and remembered for years. The difference is not found in the amount of time shared, but in the honesty brought into that time. The Stoics valued sincerity above appearance because they understood that substance quietly outlives performance. A relationship grounded in trust asks for far less maintenance than one held together by constant reassurance. As your perspective becomes steadier, you also begin noticing the difference between attention and care. The two are often mistaken for one another because they can appear similar on the surface. Someone may contact you often while never truly seeing you. Another person may speak only occasionally, yet every conversation reflects patience, understanding, and genuine concern. This distinction becomes easier to recognize once you stop searching for constant confirmation. The mind becomes less occupied with counting messages or measuring responses and more interested in observing consistency. Integrity reveals itself through repeated actions over time. It is found in reliability, honesty, and quiet loyalty rather than dramatic displays of affection. Those qualities rarely demand attention, yet they remain present long after excitement fades. The Stoics repeatedly encouraged choosing companions with great care because the people closest to us quietly shape the direction of our thinking. They understood that character develops through repeated influence. Spend enough time with those who constantly complain, and discouragement begins feeling ordinary. Spend enough time with those who chase appearances above substance, and it becomes easier to forget what truly matters. The opposite is equally true. A single thoughtful friend who values honesty, restraint, and wisdom can influence a life more deeply than countless casual acquaintances. This is not because numbers lack value. It is because depth has always accomplished what quantity alone cannot. One meaningful conversation can reshape perspective in ways that hundreds of empty exchanges never will. As this understanding grows stronger, another subtle change begins taking place within you. There is less pressure to maintain every connection simply because it has existed for a long time. Instead of asking how many relationships you can preserve, you begin asking whether those relationships encourage growth, mutual respect, and integrity. Carl Jung understood that isolation is not always loneliness. Sometimes it is psychological recovery, a temporary withdrawal from the unconscious roles we perform for others, allowing us to remember who we are beneath them. This reflection is not an invitation to become distant or overly selective. It is simply a reminder that time is limited and attention is precious. The Stoics viewed both as resources that deserved careful stewardship. Giving them away without intention often leaves little remaining for the people and pursuits that genuinely deserve them. This same principle quietly extends beyond friendships and into the relationship you maintain with yourself. For many people, the inner conversation has become neglected precisely because so much attention has been directed outward. There is always another opinion to consider, another expectation to satisfy, another comparison inviting dissatisfaction. Yet the person whose company you keep every hour of every day is yourself. If that relationship is built upon constant self-criticism, endless comparison, or impossible standards, no amount of outside approval will create lasting peace. The Stoics practiced daily reflection because they believed self-respect grows through honest examination rather than constant judgment. They sought progress instead of perfection, understanding that steady improvement creates a stronger foundation than temporary success. When you begin treating your own mind with the same patience you hope to receive from others, something unexpected happens. Solitude feels less empty because it is no longer occupied by unnecessary self-conflict. Decisions become calmer because they are guided by principles instead of pressure. Relationships also become lighter. You stop expecting other people to complete what only inner discipline can provide. Their presence becomes something to appreciate rather than something to depend upon. Gratitude quietly replaces attachment, and respect begins replacing expectation. This shift rarely attracts attention from the outside, yet it transforms nearly every interaction from within. Over time, the value of a quieter life becomes increasingly clear. You no longer measure richness by the number of conversations filling each day or the amount of attention surrounding your name. Instead, you begin valuing the rare qualities that remain dependable regardless of circumstance: trustworthy friendships, thoughtful words, honest intentions, and a mind capable of resting peacefully in its own company. The Stoics understood that abundance is not created by collecting more, but by needing less. Perhaps that wisdom applies not only to possessions and ambitions, but also to relationships. A single trustworthy companion may indeed be worth more than countless empty conversations, and a steady relationship with your own character may prove to be the strongest companion you will ever have. This is why silence eventually stops feeling empty. At first, the absence of constant stimulation can seem uncomfortable because the mind has become accustomed to moving from one source of attention to the next. Every spare moment expects to be occupied. Every pause seems to invite another distraction. Yet something remarkable happens when those habits are no longer constantly reinforced. The mind slowly begins remembering how to rest without needing entertainment. Thoughts become less hurried. Decisions become less impulsive. Even emotions begin arriving with less urgency because there is no longer an immediate need to respond to every feeling the moment it appears. What once felt like boredom gradually reveals itself as space, and space allows judgment to become clearer than it could ever be in the middle of endless activity. The Stoics often practiced voluntary simplicity for a similar reason. They intentionally reduced comfort, noise, and unnecessary excess, not because these things were inherently harmful, but because dependence upon them quietly weakened the mind. A person who cannot tolerate a little discomfort soon becomes controlled by the pursuit of comfort. Likewise, a person who cannot tolerate a few moments of silence becomes dependent upon constant distraction. Freedom is not found in having endless choices. It is found in no longer being controlled by them. That is why self-command occupied such an important place within Stoic philosophy. It was never about suppressing emotion or rejecting pleasure. It was about developing the ability to choose deliberately rather than being carried wherever habit happened to lead. With practice, everyday moments begin turning into opportunities for quiet discipline. Waiting in line no longer feels like wasted time because patience itself becomes the exercise. A walk without headphones becomes an opportunity to observe rather than escape. A morning without immediately reaching for a screen becomes a reminder that your attention is yours before it belongs to the world. Carl Jung believed that many people spend their lives surrounding themselves with noise because they fear meeting the person beneath the performance. Every moment of intentional silence becomes an opportunity to move in the opposite direction, not away from yourself, but toward yourself. None of these actions appear extraordinary from the outside. They are almost invisible, yet lasting strength has always been built through small habits repeated consistently, rather than dramatic gestures performed occasionally. This gradual training also changes the way you experience uncertainty. In the past, every unexpected change might have felt like a disruption, demanding an immediate solution. Over time, uncertainty begins looking less like an enemy and more like an opportunity to practice steadiness. The Stoics believed that we cannot control the arrival of difficult circumstances, but we can influence the condition in which those circumstances find us. A mind that has learned to remain calm during quiet moments becomes better prepared when genuine challenges eventually appear. Discipline practiced in peace becomes strength available during hardship. That is why these quieter seasons should never be mistaken for inactivity. Beneath the surface, something essential is being strengthened. There is another lesson hidden within this process. The world often rewards speed, quick replies, immediate opinions, instant reactions, and constant availability are praised as signs of engagement. Yet wisdom rarely develops at the same pace as urgency. It requires observation, reflection, and the willingness to delay judgment until understanding has had time to mature. The Stoics repeatedly encouraged slowing the movement of the mind before attempting to change the movement of the world. They knew that many mistakes are not caused by lack of intelligence, but by acting before reason has fully caught up with emotion. A disciplined pause prevents countless regrets that hurried certainty often creates. As the days pass, confidence begins taking on a different character. It no longer depends upon being constantly occupied or continually reassured by outside approval. Instead, it grows quietly through promises kept to yourself. You notice that you are becoming someone who can remain patient without feeling powerless, someone who can wait without becoming restless, and someone who can face an uncertain situation without immediately searching for escape. This confidence is difficult to display because it exists primarily within. It is measured not by how loudly a person speaks, but by how steadily they remain when circumstances invite unnecessary reaction. The Stoics valued this form of strength because it could not be granted by fortune nor taken away by misfortune. Eventually, there comes a day when you step back into the same routines, speak with many of the same people, and walk through the same places. Yet something no longer feels familiar. The streets have not changed. Your responsibilities remain. The conversations sound much the same as they always did. From the outside, life appears almost untouched. The real difference exists somewhere no one else can immediately see. It exists in the quiet space between an event and your response to it. The urgency that once followed every interruption has faded. The pressure to prove yourself has become noticeably lighter. What once demanded an emotional reaction now receives a thoughtful pause instead. That change is difficult to describe because it is not loud enough to attract attention, yet it is powerful enough to reshape the way every ordinary moment is experienced. At the same time, another burden begins falling away. The fear of disappointing everyone gradually loses its authority. This does not happen because you stop caring about people. In many ways, you begin caring more deeply than before. The difference is that your decisions are no longer driven by the impossible task of keeping everyone satisfied. The Stoics often reminded themselves that trying to please every person eventually leads to abandoning one's own judgment. A life directed entirely by expectations can never become a life directed by wisdom. There will always be conflicting demands, competing opinions, and impossible standards. Accepting this reality brings an unexpected sense of relief. You stop measuring every decision by whether someone might disapprove and begin measuring it by whether it reflects honesty, fairness, courage, and self-command. This quieter confidence also changes the way you use your words. Conversations become slower, not because you have less to say, but because every sentence carries more intention. You no longer feel responsible for filling every silence or offering an opinion on every subject. Listening becomes easier because you are no longer preparing your next response before the other person has finished speaking. Patience quietly replaces urgency. Even disagreement begins taking a different shape. Instead of trying to defeat another perspective, you become more interested in understanding why it exists. This does not weaken conviction. It strengthens it, because beliefs examined with calm reflection become far more durable than beliefs defended through impulse alone. The same transformation reaches your commitments. Before, saying yes often felt easier than risking disappointment. Every request appeared urgent, every obligation seemed necessary, and every opportunity looked too important to decline. Eventually, that way of living scattered your attention across so many directions that very little remained for what truly mattered. Now each commitment receives a moment of reflection before becoming a promise. Time is treated with greater respect because you understand it can only be spent once. Attention is offered deliberately rather than automatically. Protecting your peace no longer feels selfish because you finally recognize that a distracted mind cannot give its best to anyone, including the people it loves most. People around you may notice these changes without fully understanding them. Some will simply say that you seem calmer. Others may wonder why you no longer react to situations that once frustrated you. A few may even mistake your steadiness for distance, because they were accustomed to the version of you that immediately responded to every expectation placed before you. Their confusion is understandable. They became familiar with your old patterns, just as you did. Yet, genuine growth often looks unusual to those who only knew the habits you have quietly left behind. The Stoics never encouraged changing yourself to satisfy changing opinions. They encouraged remaining faithful to principles, even when those principles were misunderstood. Perhaps the most meaningful realization arrives when you stop thinking of this journey as becoming someone different. The language of transformation often suggests that the person you were before must disappear completely, but that is rarely what happens. More often, the unnecessary layers begin falling away. The constant need for approval grows quieter. The fear of judgment loses its influence. The habits created by years of reacting instead of reflecting gradually loosen their grip. Beneath them, you discover qualities that had been waiting patiently all along: sound judgment, quiet courage, patience, gratitude, and the ability to remain steady without becoming indifferent. Those qualities were never absent. They were simply difficult to hear beneath the noise. That is why stepping away was never truly about escaping the world. It was about returning to it with clearer eyes and a steadier mind. You did not disappear because you wanted to become someone else. You disappeared long enough to remember the person you were before endless expectations convinced you to measure your worth through approval instead of character. The world continues moving with all its uncertainty, distractions, and demands, but it no longer determines the condition of your inner life. That responsibility has quietly returned to where it always belonged, and once it does, every step forward feels lighter, not because life has become easier, but because you are finally walking through it as yourself. The world will always ask for more of your attention, more of your time, and more of your energy. The real challenge is making sure it never takes the one thing that matters most, your ability to govern your own mind. Keep choosing wisdom over noise, discipline over impulse, and character over approval. That is where lasting peace is found. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal and for sharing this journey toward a calmer, stronger, and more purposeful life. If this reflection resonated with you, the video on your screen is a perfect next step. Stay with it, continue the journey, and until next time, take care of your mind, because it is the one place you will live in for your entire life.